everybody to this meeting of the Audit and Scrutiny this afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. Just one thing to mention, item 7, Andrew has sent out an email just to confirm that item 7 is not ready yet, but it will come to a future panel. So we'll get to that one in due course. Are there any apologies, Andrew?
Yes, convener. The only apologies from Councillor Burrows.
Right, thank you. And then you go to item 1 on the agenda, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest?
Yes, Chair, there will be myself for Agenda 11, 2.13.3 as a Director of NLP. But as the agenda item is for noting, I don't think I'll need to leave. But I'll leave that up to yourself.
It's okay, Trevor. Happy to have you here. Any other declarations of interest? Andrew, I've got 2. Again, it's item 11 as a Director of the Municipal Bank and also as a Director of Fusion Assets.
Okay, thank you. Will you be staying in the meeting as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think it's worthy of going out. Any more declarations of interest?
Councillor Hume has put in the chat bar.
Yes, Andy, Director of the Municipal Bank.
Right.
Again, no necessity to leave.
Right, thank you. No other declarations, so we'll just go on to item 2 on the agenda, which is the action log. And Ken is going to speak to the action log. That's page 5. Ken?
Thanks, convener. Yeah, just focusing on the table, appendix 1 on page 6. Really, the items to note are those that were carried forward or requests were made at the June meeting, which was the last audit meeting of the panel. You'll see there that the 2 issues raised, one in relation to carbon net zero. There's obviously a report on the agenda, so that carried forward will be complete as of today. The second item was in respect of some inquiries and queries members had around procurement. You'll see from the narrative there that we've incorporated the issue that was raised by members in ongoing work that we're doing in procurement. That work, field work, is nearing its completion, and we would expect the final report on that work to be available to the panel for the next meeting.
Thanks, Ken. Does anybody have any comments or questions on agenda item 2? Are we okay with that? So the recommendation is the panel is invited to note the report. Everybody happy with that? Thank you. We then go on to agenda item 3, which is the climate change target. And James McKinstry is going to speak to that one. James?
Thank you, Chair. If I can just start off, first of all, an apology. The camera is not actually working on my laptop here, so I can see you and everyone else, and I can hear everyone, and I believe you can hear me, but you will not be able to.
You're fine. Yes, no.
Apologies.
There's a few gremlins about today, James, so don't bother about it. Yeah, as long as we can hear you, that's fine.
Right, so the purpose of this report is to provide the panel with an overview of the progress that's been made in reducing our carbon emissions across the council. Also to advise the panel on the new draft climate plan, which was recently produced and taken to the Environmental and Transportation Committee in the last cycle, and is currently out for a period of consultation. The report also gives an update on how we intend to progress towards net zero by 2030, which is the council's ambition, and also, importantly, it details the challenges in this regard as well. So if we could just move on to the report, paragraph 1.1 to 1.7, that provides background, gives background to the council's climate change group, which was formed in 2016, and it's chaired by myself, and there's other heads of service on that group as well, from the main areas of emission across the council, that being property and waste, and plus the head of environmental assets is also on that group as well, and that covers the biodiversity agenda. Paragraph 1.4 details a recent subgroup that has been established within asset and procurement services to develop an individual service action plan. and all heads of service across the council have been asked to do the same as per paragraph 1.5 of the report. And what that will do is that will help us target improvement in every area of the council going forward. As per paragraphs 1.6 and 1.7, it's also apparent that within the council, as a political organisation, there's a lead being taken as well with recent policy developments coming forward, and that's very much to be welcomed. Moving on to paragraphs 2.1 to 2.6 of the report, that details the position of the council's carbon footprint, and you'll see in paragraph 2.3 that it's advised that we report our carbon footprint to the Scottish Government on an annual basis, whilst paragraph 2.4 advises that our footprint has reduced by just over 1/3 since 2015-16. And this has been mainly through the work that we've been doing in building management and also waste management in the council as well. However, it must be stressed that to continue to reduce at such a pace will be challenging going forward, and I'll come back to that later on in the report. I'll move on to paragraphs 2.7 to 2.10, which provides some detail of the draft climate plan, which is attached to your report as an appendix today. As I mentioned in my introduction, this updated draft plan was presented to the Environment and Transportation Committee in the last cycle, and it's currently out to consultation, and we're already seeing quite a healthy response rate to that consultation. What we'll do once the consultation concludes, we'll report back to the Environment and Transportation Committee on a final plan. In addition, as per paragraph 2.8, you'll note that I'll also provide an update in the council's carbon emissions to the same committee, quite possibly in cycle 1 of the next calendar year. So we'll get an update as to whether we've reduced further or not. The council has a target to achieve net zero by 2030. The Scottish Government target is 2045. That's the minimum that we'll have to achieve. And again, I'll come back to that point as I move on to the final section of the report. Paragraph 2.11 to 2.15, that deals with how we're resourcing climate action across the council. At the present time, the draft climate plan doesn't currently provide an explicit route map towards 2030. This will be informed by the specific action plans that we're asking each head of service area in the council to prepare. The target set by the council in 2019, when the council declared a climate emergency, will need to be tested against these individual plans that will come in, and also the level of financial resource that can be made available for this area, taking into account all the other challenges that compete for these financial resources. Paragraph 2.13 identifies a number of key risks ranging from time and availability of resource as we continue to develop this key policy area. Paragraph 2.4 advises we're focusing on a fabric first approach, which is in line with Scottish Government guidance, and this has been done through areas such as energy management, renewable technologies, building rationalisation, and also by working in an agile and a modern way. With all the relevant policy development that's been taken within the council, also critical in that regard. So just in summary, there's a few key points I would wish to make to the panel. I think it's quite clear that we're making very good progress to date in reducing our carbon emissions. However, there are challenges to go forward as we go forward. These are not challenges unique to North Lanarkshire Council or indeed the public sector. Challenges in finance, availability of resources, availability of technology, etc. But what is clear is there's very strong commitment coming from elected members, and there's very strong commitment within officers of the council as well. The target of 2030 is very ambitious, and I think it was understood at the time when that was set. It was a very ambitious target. It's helpful at times to get a target like that. And I think as we go forward in our annual reporting to committee, it's very, very important that we report in a robust, honest and transparent manner going forward. And I'm happy to take any questions which the panel may have.
Thanks, James. That's very helpful. You've clarified a few things there. Are there any comments, questions? Jim, yeah, we want to start off?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think everyone understands the difficulties that you're faced with, Jim. And this report is as clear as any I have seen about the likely impact of finances causing you not to deliver your target in 2030. I'm sure Elaine's got money somewhere to help with that, but and I'm sure we understand that when finances are tight, that the problem about when the plan's ready and you're looking at projects, you spend money on something that achieves a 10% target, and then you've no money left for a project that comes along later that has a potential to achieve a 15% target and things like that. So all of that is understood, and it's quite clear within the report. The plan, I didn't. And the plans there and the services need to come up with projects that will make savings. How is that knowledge going to be and information going to be imparted to council? That's the first question. It says it's statutory to achieve 75% by 2030. What are the implications if finances prevent that from happening? That's the second question. Third question is, maybe Elaine or Jim, is external money likely to be available to fund the projects that are absolutely specific for carbon reduction? That's the questions I have on this one.
Thanks, Jim. James?
Yeah, I think there's 3 questions there, and I'll maybe take them just one at a time just to make sure that I fully respond to the questions the council has asked. In relation to how do we report savings to the council, over the last 3 years or so, as part of the budget preparation process within the council, there has been quite a lot of money come out of energy budgets and other utility budgets as well, and that's a result of the work that's been done. Quite often what happens with energy savings, for example, it's after we do the work that you start to see the saving, obviously, type of thing. So there's been some £3 million or so in budget reductions been made over the last 3 years or so. Now what we can do is we can make the work that we do, we can make savings in consumption, but I think the other thing that heavily influences energy as well is actually the cost per unit as well. And clearly what's going on at the moment is something that we need to keep an eye on very closely. So we report it to the council through the budget process as appropriate, and also through the budgetary control reports that go to committee at the moment. And we do a lot of work out with the committee process as well. For example, we're in discussions with colleagues in education at the moment about some of the water usage in school, so we're having a look at that at the moment in terms, just to see, what's happening in that area. In relation to the second question, which is the 75% by 2030, that's the government's target. I have to be honest with you, I don't fully understand what the implications will be. I don't think we're going to be penalised or fined or anything. I don't think that's coming out at the present time. But I think what we have to do is we keep moving forward, and you can see we are making good progress, and we're not making any excuses trying to, these targets are hard, we won't achieve them. That's not been said at this point in time. I think we'll need to look at what resources are available to us within the council, and then come into external funding. There is external funding which we utilise at the moment through Scottish Government and through other agencies as well. But as we go forward to 2030, I would like to think that there would be more external funding that might be available, because I think there's not many things all political parties agree on, but one of the things that they do agree on is the impact of climate change. And I think that it's important with the reports that we're going to committee. Not only do we take our annual report to committee, as I mentioned, we were in the Environmental Transportation Committee in the last cycle. We're going to go into policy and strategy before Christmas and do a post COP26 report as well. So I think what we are doing is we're deliberately keeping this on the agenda for senior politicians and for senior officers within the council as well. And what we're looking for is quite a bit of support, but also quite a bit of challenge going forward as well. And I think we're also feeding into meetings of COSLA. For example, climate change seems to be on every meeting of COSLA at the present time, so we're feeding in briefing notes, etc. on that as well.
Thanks, James. Jim, are you okay with that? Have you?
Yeah, the answers are fine. I've got one more question, Chair.
Yeah, sure.
Who's the member climate champion that's on the committee?
Actually, he's actually one of your colleagues. I can't remember his name. Maybe Linda, would you just remind me? I was exchanging emails with him yesterday. I've just got a mental blank.
Yeah, sorry, it's Councillor Goldie is the climate champion.
Ah, right. Okay. Thank you.
Right, Jim. Thank you. Helen, if you just give me 1 minute, because Ken's wanting in just to comment on Councillor Hughes. So if we bring in Ken first, then we'll get Helen. Thanks. Ken?
Yeah, thanks, convener. Yeah, it was really just to follow on that comment and the question specifically that Councillor Hume asked about sort of central government funding. It's probably worth noting that the National Audit Office in a recent report, which obviously reflected on the role of the UK government, so not the Scottish government, but did comment in the context of the UK that central government had effectively given local government significant challenges and responsibilities there without necessarily making clear what funding would be available to provide and support that. And that was a comment they also made in respect of other non-central government bodies. So I think, given the fact that obviously the bulk of our funding comes through the Scottish government, that's a discussion that I'm sure COSLA will be looking to have with the Scottish government around the availability of resources to support what clearly will be a financially challenging issue to progress in line with the sort of timescales that central government, both UK and Scottish, have set.
Thanks, Ken. Helen?
Hi there. I don't know if you can hear me okay. Pretty much my question borders on Ken's previous comments. I noticed from years 2024 to 25, there is the anticipated, vast reduction in emissions to contribute towards the figures. And obviously that is in line with the 2024 policy pertaining to the withdrawal of gas installations for heating sources. That is wholly dependent on the new green energy heating systems. Now, as you know, media have let it be known and explored the great expense of these heating systems, and again the external funding from Scottish Government will we will be rather wholly reliant on that. At what point do you envisage figures being made available to local authorities in respect of funding for these new green energy heating solutions that are almost certainly needed from 2024?
Thanks, Helen. Who wants to take that, Ken or James? James?
I'm happy to come in and take that one, convener.
Right, thanks.
I think what Councillor Loughrane is saying there is it clearly demonstrates one of the challenges that exists at all levels, local government level, Scotland level, UK level, and indeed international level, is there's a lot of policy developments that come out in relation to climate change, and it's quite difficult to reconcile the availability of resources to that at time, probably more linked into the fact that there is so much other things that need to be done as well. So one of the ways that we might have to manage certain things within the council, if we look at the council's capital planning, and I'll come back to the specific point that Councillor Loughrane's making there, which is about the housing stock. In terms, there is only so much money that's available in the capital plan. So if we have to do enhanced green technology, that would mean that a project would cost more. So that might mean less projects would get delivered over a specific period of time. Now you've got to look at the cost of that, but then you've also got to look at the cost of not doing it, because I think we're all aware that the impacts of climate change is absolutely irreversible now. And if we don't do things in terms, we're just continuing to make the situation worse. So going to the housing stock, etc. That's one of the important reasons why we're asking every head of service to do a plan in their area so that we can see what the implications of that are, and then we would bring that back to council committee probably next year as well. I think what we're going to be doing next year is probably come back and advise the committee whether we think we will hit the 2030 target or not. I'm talking about the 100% net zero target, and is there any other specific actions that the council needs to do, and you know, that'll have to compete with everything else that we need to do within the council as well. There's also, in terms of homeowners as well, there's advice and there's assistance via agencies such as the Home Energy Scotland body as well. I was actually speaking to my daughter about this last night, because she's actually looking for a home at the moment. She's at a point now in terms, you know, she's looking at a house with electricity, and she thinks it's bad to buy a house with electricity because it'll, you know, our bills will be more. And I was explaining to her, I said, well, you know, it's not that long before you will not be able to buy a house with electricity. So it is going to have an impact on personal finances as well going forward. And the 2024 target that's referred to in the report, that is for new build housing. That's not necessarily for kind of doing all retrofitting of housing as well. So that kind of recognises the challenges that's in that area.
Thanks, James. Helen, are you okay with that?
Just a small supplementary,
Yeah, sure.
just given that obviously we have the target to build 5,000 new homes, which will overlap with that period. The 2024 it is just on the horizon, and I was keen to understand if there was chat between the UK government funding via Holyrood to make its way to local authorities, if indeed 2024 is almost certainly a cut-off point. You would have thought there may well be something in the pipeline, pardon the pun, at this point. That was all.
Thanks, Helen. James, have you anything to say on that?
I don't really have much to say about it, because that would be discussions that politicians would be having with each other.
Right.
I think what we'll see as we go forward in terms, you know, the climate change is already quite a hot potato politically. You know, Scotland, the UK is hosting COP26 this year, so I would imagine, I'm just speculating here, that maybe some actions will start to flow from our politicians at all levels going forward.
Thanks, James. And Ken just mentions that, you know, this is recognised as a strategic risk, and it is included in the corporate risk register. So are there any more questions or comments on this item? So item 3, the recommendations are: recognise the progress made since 24th of June 16. Note the draft climate plan following approval at Environment and Transport Committee will be consulted on during September, and recognise that net zero is a target the council must strive to achieve against a challenging financial background and demanding timescales. Are we okay with that? That's noted. Okay, we're on to agenda item 4, which is page 53. And this is the internal audit progress report, and Ken is going to speak to this one. Ken?
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, this is the report by which we present the panel with the results of work carried out in the period. You'll see from the table on page 54 that there were 2 reports finalised in the period. The summer's always generally a fairly light period for us getting things finished. Either our staff are not around or client staff are not around, so we generally have a relatively lower level of formal outputs at this time of the year to present to the panel. Included in the report, however, is also a range of other work that we've been doing, which I'm reporting to you in line with the agreed internal audit reporting protocol. So to kind of go through section 2 from 2.5 onwards, we've provided a narrative on the 2 formal reports which were finalised in the period. One in relation to public protection, obviously a very significant issue, and one that again features highly on the corporate risk register. So that report was looking at the adequacy and effectiveness of the council's arrangements for assessing compliance and performance in that, you know, very important area. You'll see from the narrative that is a positive audit report, and I think it's worth noting the commentary at paragraph 2.9. Obviously, the pandemic and the impact of the public policy decisions around that created a significantly challenging environment for the public protection functions across the council. But you'll see from the report there that we're comfortable that the arrangements that were put in place during that period were appropriate and robust. We have identified a small number of areas for improvement, and you'll see from the narrative included in the final report that a number of those require to be progressed with partners, so that the council alone is not responsible for public protection. It's very much a responsibility that is shared through a range of partner working arrangements. So the external parties have been, the audit recommendations have been discussed with the external parties, and they are being progressed through those, but they're not solely at the control and behest of the council. So that's probably worth noting. The second report, in relation to follow-up work that we did latterly on the Scottish Attainment Challenge and Pupil Equity Fund, was designed to provide assurance on the kind of performance and governance arrangements around that. And obviously we had a report, the panel had a report earlier in the year from the Executive Director, Education and Families, on the back of the Audit Scotland report, which looked at the educational attainment gap and how that had from the picture in that nationally over the last few years. Obviously there was quite a detailed report, and further reports have gone to the relevant service committee, so I think probably this report needs to be seen in that wider context. A generally positive report. You'll see for paragraph 215, however, we have identified 216 rather. We have identified a small number of areas, and I think it's a reflection of the incremental approach to, I think the service are learning what works best and how those two programmes are best coordinated and managed. So I'm comfortable that the good progress has been made in terms of the governance of those programmes. Obviously, the efficacy of those is a different kettle of fish, and again, that's reported on separately through the relevant service committee. On page 56, we highlight work that we did in relation to asset rationalisation, where we haven't produced a final report, largely because the situation, as members may anticipate from some of the commentary, is extremely fluid at the moment. And I didn't think it was necessary to have potentially a report where there was a degree of either disagreement and or significant change since the report had been finalised prior to coming to this panel. So you'll see that in paragraphs 220 onwards, we've done some work there looking at how the council is taking forward asset rationalisation. You'll see at 225 as well, we've obviously made some comments to management, which I think they have responded positively to, but it's clearly quite a situation at the moment where many organisations are assessing the wider impacts of the pandemic and the future working arrangements that will flow from the last 18 months and future thoughts around digital and agile and home working. So there's a great deal of kind of uncertainty around this issue at the moment, and we've made some comments there in terms of how that should be taken forward. At section at 228 onwards, I've updated you on some of the more sort of investigative work that we've had underway in line with the reporting protocol. So one issue relates to work around the council's roads lighting section. You'll see from the narrative there that I think we're content that the action that management have taken in response to the issues that were raised externally, and also ongoing work that we had previously expressed some comments on, that's been significantly progressed by management, and I'm comfortable that those arrangements are now far more robust than they had been previously. And you'll also see some work that we did in relation to allegations of misconduct in a secondary school, and again the appropriate narrative there provides you with an oversight of the conclusions of that work. So that's the kind of content of the report. I'm obviously happy to take any questions anybody has.
Thanks, Ken. That was helpful. Jim, you've got a question?
Yes, thanks. Page 57, the 232. The timeline the service is committed to give you, Ken. You got a date for that? When it will be delivered, and how do you intend to bring members up to date with how the service has responded to your comments? Basically the same for 234. So schools one. You made some recommendations there, and the schools they'll look at it. I think how will you keep us up to date with their response to that, and is there a date for it?
Thanks, Jim.
apologies, Councillor Hume, I had a bit of sound issues there, so forgive me if I don't answer all your questions. If I don't, if you can just gently nudge me with anything I omit. I think in respect to the 2 points I picked up were in relation to how we will monitor implementation of agreed actions in response to the issues in terms of lighting in the school. The answer to that is that both of those will be captured by the kind of standard follow-up work we have. So we'll agree a timeline. I haven't agreed a timeline yet with environmental assets. That will be discussed. We'll get a timeline and we'll progress that in line with the normal arrangements for follow-up of audit recommendations. And we'll do the same for the issue in relation to schools. Does that cover everything you raised?
Yes, that's fine, Ken. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Any other questions? Can I ask just a couple of things, Ken? On page 57, 2.29, there was an anonymous letter. How much credence do you place in like anonymous letters as opposed to where somebody's going to commit their name to something if they've got a genuine complaint? And the other one, just as a second question, was really to do with the PEF and the SAC. You know, the controls on the SAC, on reading this, seem to be much more rigorous than the controls on PEF. Now, I don't know whether that's maybe that I'm just not reading it correctly, but just that was my reading of it. And, you know, when Anne Monroe doesn't reply, she's saying that your teachers will be encouraged. And that word encouraged doesn't sound to be particularly firm if they're trying to tighten up the rules, you know, on the PEF situation. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, thanks. I'll take the questions in reverse order, if I may.
That's
because
fine,
the
yeah.
SAC PEF answer is probably slightly longer than the. I think in relation to SAC and PEF, you're probably. I'll probably hack education colleagues off by saying something hugely contentious here, but I think, yeah, the general observation you made about the difference in which the different ways in which SAC and PEF are governed is probably not wholly inaccurate, if I can put it that way, and to some extent reflects the nature of the funding and the way in which the policy has been framed in respect of each of those funding streams by Scottish Government. So your members will recall that one of the kind of key principles behind the PEF is that it's very much controlled and directed by the head teacher, whereas the SAC funding is available more to the Education Authority to dispense in a more strategic way. And I think the service, to be fair, have probably been quite sensitive to any potential accusations that head teachers do not have sufficient control over PEF. Now, I think over time they have recognised at their own behest and partly through prodding from the likes of us that obviously the two streams of expenditure are targeted at pretty much the same thing. So although they have different reporting requirements, it makes sense to try and provide a strategic oversight of them in the round. And I think, you know, they have been taking incremental steps towards that, and that's probably that progression will continue, I think, as part of the actions that are taken in response to the audit report. Notwithstanding that the head teachers will remain very much in control of how that PEF funding is used, because that's a key requirement that we need to meet in terms of the Scottish Government funding stream. So that hopefully answers that question. In respect to how much credence we give to anonymous allegations, we would certainly be, you know, place more initial reliance on things where people are prepared to put their name, but we can't discount anonymous letters, and we certainly do not do so. There may be a variety of reasons why people who wish to raise matters don't feel it appropriate or able to put their name to them. So we will treat them in the first instance as seriously as accusations with a name attached, albeit, you know, with a sort of the caveat that we want to make, you know, we want to ensure that we're not investigating and involving you know, individuals in potential audit work or audit investigations where there doesn't appear to be grounds, because obviously we don't want to encourage sort of malicious accusations either. So it's a balance needs to be struck, but I think by and large although I'm probably not the best judge, we probably do achieve that balance.
Okay, Ken, thank you very much. If there's no further questions on agenda item 4, can we note the findings, conclusions and recommendations of completed internal audit reports together with the associated management responses? Consider whether there are any issues raised by internal audit which the panel consider are sufficiently significant to require a further report from management to be submitted to a future meeting of the panel. Is there anything in that one that we want to bring to Ken's attention under consideration? Are we okay with that? Because we've been asked to consider that one. If there's anything else we want to raise. And the third one is request that internal audit provide a report to future meetings of the panel, reporting progress made by management implementing agreed management actions in relation to all audit recommendations categorised as red or amber, and otherwise note the report. Are we fine with that? Okay, thanks very much. We go on to agenda item 5, which is page 87. Again, this is Ken. This is the follow-up. Ken, this is you again.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, this is obviously, I've referred to it in the previous agenda item, also the standard approach we take to reporting on the work we do to follow up the implementation of actions agreed by management in response to both internal and external audit reports. So the executive summary provides an overview of the number of actions which fall within scope of this report, and the various tables at section 2 provide an analysis of the extent to which these are complete, partially implemented, or no longer relevant. As has been the practice in previous reports, we've also then taken those items where the action is perhaps partially progressed but not yet complete, and carried out a kind of risk assessment to bring to the panel's attention those items where we feel the residual risk remains either medium or high, and those are detailed in Appendix 1. So if I can take you through each of those in turn, you'll see that items 1 and 2 really relate to carbon management, and obviously you'll see the narrative there, but we've obviously had a report in this earlier today from the head of Asset and Procurement Solutions, which has obviously updated the panel on the general progress and direction of travel on those issues. So I think that probably, I would suggest that satisfies any concerns around those two aspects. Item 3 relates to the corporate risk register, and you'll see from the narrative in the kind of current position column that the 2 items that remain outstanding are in relation to the National Care Service, where we're really in the process of trying to reframe that risk in light of the current developments around the proposals from the Scottish Government in respect of the National Care Service, and obviously, trying to make sure that we reflect in the risk register the associated updated risks arising from that, and that's obviously again a very fluid position, and work on that is ongoing. And in relation to asset rationalisation, obviously again I referenced earlier the kind of fluidity and uncertainties there are around that, the general issue at the moment, and that is being reflected in ongoing work to update the asset rationalisation corporate risk. So again, I would suggest to the panel that the panel can take some comfort that those 2 items are being actively progressed and hopefully can be drawn to a conclusion relatively soon. In respect to item 4, you'll see from the narrative there that the ICT's disaster recovery plan has now been reviewed and updated and formally presented. There's ongoing work, really, I think, reflecting the fact that the service themselves recognise that we probably need to do more in that area than we've historically done. And you'll see from the narrative there that there's quite a lot of work being undertaken and is progressing, both within business solutions, but also in terms of engaging with the services across the council to progress that. So my suggestion would be that the panel notes that and asks for a further update in terms of the ongoing work that's laid out there. Katrina's obviously on the call if there's any detailed questions arising from that. And item 5, you'll see in relation to self-directed support, the management have pretty much implemented the bulk of the recommendations. The one issue that remains outstanding is in relation to putting together all the various information into a single comprehensive document for staff, and then updating and training all staff in using the new procedures. You'll see from the narrative there that that's now significantly progressed. It has been delayed by other pressures, which I think are obviously self-evident in respect of the social care service. So again, I would hope that the panel would be content to just note that, but obviously happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Ken. I think we'll be happy to get an update on item 4, in due course when it comes. Any questions for Ken on our comments on agenda item 5? Are we okay with that? Okay, on agenda item 5, we'll just have to note the contents of this report and consider whether there are any issues arising from this report in which they wish to receive further information from relevant management. So we'll get an update on number 4, Ken, in due course. Thanks very much, everybody. And then we go on to agenda item 6, which is page 97, which is the Internal Audit Chapter. Once again, it's you, Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, this is quite an important document that sets out the purpose, authority, and kind of principal responsibilities of the Council's internal audit section. The purpose of this report is really to just get the panel's approval on what is an updated and revised document which has been reviewed in line with best practice and with the relevant external professional standards that are laid out both in the executive summary and the report itself. There are no material changes to the proposed charter or the purpose, authority and principal responsibilities of the audit function from that previously approved by the panel in 2018. The revised charter has been approved by the corporate management team and is now submitted for consideration. As I say, I don't think there's any particular issues arising that I would want to highlight to the panel, but happy to take any comments or questions.
Right, Ken, thanks very much. Has Andy got any comments or questions on agenda item 6? That's fine. As Ken says, there's no material changes in the proposed charter. So we're being asked to approve the revised internal audit charter at Appendix 1. Are we happy to approve? I'll just take that silence as yes. Thank you. So that takes us on. We're missing out 7, so we're on to agenda item 8, which is page 107.
Chair, do you mind if I ask when 7 will be available to the members?
Ken, can you answer that one?
Well, the actual document will be available. My understanding is it's obviously been gone through some formal governance processes to get approval within the council, subject to discussions about the timing of future corporate risks coming to the panel. We're happy to slot it in whenever it's available. I don't know if Katrina wants to just
yes, I see Katrina. Yeah, Katrina, please.
Yes, so it was intended to come today. As Ken says, it goes through a range of different governance groups, and it went to corporate management teams last meeting, but that was a really busy agenda and they didn't actually consider it, so that's why it's not on today's meeting. So if the panel are happy, then we'll absolutely slot it into the next cycle because it has been completed. It's just not finished its governance reviews.
Right, Katrina, I think we're fine with that. Thank you. Agenda item 8 is Katrina update on the 5 frameworks supporting the plan for North Lanarkshire and the programme of work. Katrina.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sound is very bad today, so hopefully everyone can hear me. So yeah, members are aware that we've got these 5 frameworks that support the plan for North Lanarkshire and the importance that they have in helping to demonstrate the success of the plan and also the programme of work. So details were last brought around the status of the frameworks to panel about this time last year actually, and this report setting out the current position for each of them so that the panel can consider it as part of its oversight role. So the report itself has got the detail for all of the 5 frameworks. In section 2, there's the background as to how the frameworks were developed and the information you've seen previously. Then there's a current position and then there's a next step. So I'll just very briefly touch on the current position for each of them and the next steps as well. So paragraph 2.3, and this is on the strategic policy framework. So there was details of that included at the June 21 meeting of Audit and Scrutiny Panel as part of Audit Scotland's interim management report. And the key thing to note there that's being considered as being good commitment to being able to keep that moving forward, with 28 out of the 31 policies and strategies that have been included in the original document already considered, updated and approved through the various cycles. So next steps for that, paragraph 2.6 highlights that the refreshed strategic policy framework document is scheduled to go to policy and strategy in the next cycle. Update on where we're at. So there's been considerable amount of work to review and refresh that already underway, and that's detailed in paragraph 2.7. Some of the things that we've been considering as part of that review, trying to identify if there's any gaps in the current policies and strategies that we do need to take into consideration in line with the priorities that we have. Also reviewing the guidance that accompanies that, and particularly that we've had some questions through some of the other service committees about making sure that we've got appropriate consultation on the strategies and policies that we have. So the guidance is being updated to reflect that. And crucially as well, just given the pace of change that's underway in the council, making sure that we've got good collaboration when strategies and policies are being considered, so that one policy doesn't go to the detriment of another. So that's been part of our review as well. Moving on to the strategic performance framework now, and the current position of that. That was last reported here to the panel in March 2021. We presented the latest results against the level 1 indicators and all of the achievements that had gone through the programme of work for 2020. Highlighted there that we were going to have a performance reporting schedule for 21-22 for all of those indicators, and that we would have performance coming back to the panel as is on today's agenda. On the performance indicators. I think I mentioned at the last meeting as well that we had a pilot framework for strategic performance underway, and you can see in paragraph 2.12 there the 3 areas that were selected. So our next steps really is to bring this back into cycle 4 as well, to assess the success of those 3 pilots that have gone to the service committees over this last cycle, with the strategic performance framework document then being updated to for any lessons learned or any changes that have come out from those pilots. The strategic self-evaluation framework is the next item on today's agenda, so I'll just pass by that. Moving on then from page 113 to the programme and project management framework. The current position on that, quite briefly, we've got that review and refresh of all of that underway at the moment, and it's scheduled to complete by the end of this year, and details will come back to committee once that's been concluded. And the strategic governance framework, so the last one then, extensive programme of activity had been undertaken throughout this year to refresh that completely. Paragraph 232 provides all of the detail that we considered, and members are probably fairly familiar with this because we actually just considered it at the panel at the beginning of this month. And then just moving forward, and probably just worth highlighting that all 5 of these frameworks will continue to remain on an annual refresh programme, with the details coming back to panel just to make sure that they always remain appropriate and fit for purpose. And back to you, Chair, for the recommendations.
Thank you, Katrina. That's very comprehensive coverage. Thank you. Has anybody any questions on agenda item 8 for Katrina? Any comments or questions? Are we okay with that? Right, thank you. We're asked to note the contents and note the progress update and next steps, including the ongoing review programme for the 5 frameworks, to ensure each remains aligned to the plan for North Lanarkshire and programme of work. Are we fine with that? Thanks very much. Then we go on to agenda item 9. Page 119, which is the review and refresh of the strategic self-evaluation framework, and it's you again, Katrina. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. So I'll just provide a few brief comments and then pass over to Susan Laurie, who will just talk us through the content. So a programme of self-evaluation is considered really essential to help with evidencing that duty of our continuous improvement and able to then help us to comply with our duty of best value. And the report today talks through how this evaluation framework can actually help to deliver on that through standardised processes. So if it's all right with you, Chair, I'll just hand over to Susan and she can just provide a little bit more context for members.
That's fine, Katrina. Yes, Susan, thank you.
Good afternoon, members, and thanks, Katrina and convener. As Katrina said, this report is on the agenda today to provide a refreshed strategic self-evaluation framework. It's here for noting, and it follows the commitment set out in the programme of work to review and refresh all 5 of the frameworks that support the plan for North Lanarkshire and a programme of work during the 21-22 financial year. So I'll just hone in on a few points in the report, if I may. Page 120 of your report starts the background and it just sets the scene for the strategic self-evaluation and its development in line with the plan for North Lanarkshire and the programme of work in alignment with the 25 ambition statements. The bottom of paragraph 1.20 reiterates the 12-week self-evaluation programme that had been in place during 2020 but was paused due to the pandemic and refreshed in order to realign it with the current working environment. Paragraph 1.6 just reiterates the Council's commitment to maintaining self-evaluation and the importance of that by the self-evaluation exercise that was undertaken during the last financial year on the Council's response to the pandemic. And paragraph 1.8 just reminds members of the Best Value Assurance Report recommendation in terms of self-evaluation, which this report here today now fulfills. Paragraph 1.10 and 11 and 12 just to remind members of the best value element within this and the alignment of the Council's strategic self-evaluation framework with that best value, that national approach, to ensure that these work together moving forward. And obviously the importance that the Accounts Commission place on self-evaluation in terms of an improvement strategy that drives forward Council's performance. So section 2 of the report, which starts on page 122 of your part, is really just a summary of the contents which are in appendix 1 of your report, which starts on page 126. So if I hone in paragraph 2.5, it's really just to say self-evaluation, it's actually aligned to what the Council is trying to achieve, and that's one of the things we try to introduce through this new self-evaluation programme, is that any self-evaluation improvement actions arising inform what the Council is actually trying to achieve, whether that's something on the programme of work or a local outcome improvement plan, but it is aligned to the plan for North Lanarkshire. And all the self-evaluation exercises are undertaken within the context of whether it's a service, a project, or the group operates. So paragraph 2.6 just talk about the appendix A, which is in your pack, and that is just the alignment of the Council's strategic self-evaluation framework with the best value guidance and the themes therein. It also talks in paragraph 2.9 where we will make best use of frameworks that already exist nationally, for example the CIPFA Financial Management Code and the Education Scotland, how good is our learning development in the community, just to make sure there's no duplication and ensures that the Council's self-evaluation exercises are focused on the gaps and what improvement is needed locally. Paragraph 2.10 just introduces 3 new roles that we've introduced through the self-evaluation framework this year, and that is the role of a champion, which is a member of the corporate management team to drive forward these evaluation programmes, the strategic oversight role of the corporate management team, and the challenge and scrutiny role of the Audit and Scrutiny Panel. So Appendix B in your appendix, which starts on page 145, highlights the programme of self-evaluation exercises to be undertaken during 21 and 22 along with the relevant timescales. There's a wide range of programme evaluation programme activity there in terms of ambition statements, corporate approaches and particular groups, and these include recommendations that have been made by audit for specific evaluations to be undertaken. I wasn't planning on going into the appendix in any detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions if I can. So I'll just hand back to you, convener, for the recommendations.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Susan on agenda item 9? Nothing up on the chat board, so I think we're okay. On agenda item 9, we're asked to note the contents of this report and accompanying appendices. Note the refreshed strategic self-evaluation framework and rolling review programme and the requirement therein to ensure that self-evaluation identifies areas for improvement which are focused on and contribute to delivery of the programme of work and achievement of the ambitions set out in the plan for North Lanarkshire. Note the challenge and scrutiny role of the Audit and Scrutiny Panel in line with their responsibility to provide an independent review of the Council's governance, risk management, performance and control frameworks, and note the next steps. Are we fine with that? Okay, thanks very much. So we're on to agenda item 10. We're certainly getting through it today, that's good. Agenda item 10, which is page 149. And again, it's Katrina, Plan for North Lanarkshire Performance Benchmarking. Thanks, Katrina.
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. So I'll be very brief because we do have the presentation from the Improvement Service today. So really the last sentence then in the bottom of the executive summary, page 149, the report's really just here to help provide some context for the presentation that we're about to get from the Improvement Service. Linda, would you like to add any additional context before Emily comes in to speak?
Thanks, Katrina. As you said, the details all contained within the report. And it's really just to highlight to members that we had agreed previously that we would focus on the 5 priorities. And today, Emily and our colleague Esther are joining us for the next part of the meeting. And Emily is going to focus on priority 1, but it's the employability area. And I'm now just going to hand over to both Emily and Esther to provide us with the detail, and then Chair will hand back to yourself for the recommendations that are contained in the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. That's fine, Emily and Esther.
Thank you very much, Chair, and Linda and Katrina as well, and thank you for inviting us along this afternoon. It's a real pleasure to engage with you all on this, so thank you. Now, is it okay if I share my screen, because we've just got some slides that we thought.
Yeah, that's perfect. Happy with that. Yeah.
Thank you. If you could let me know if you're able to see that, that would be great.
Not so far. Getting there.
Is anything showing yet?
Just a grey square at the moment.
No, I don't know how to. It says it's sharing, so I'm wondering. I'll just try again and see if it could work.
Oh, I think we've got, yes, I think I see something now.
What can I ask what you see? Sorry about this.
Just the starter, local government benchmarking framework, North Lanarkshire context.
That's perfect. That's great. Okay, thank goodness for that. That's a relief. Great. Okay. So as Linda highlighted, we thought it would be helpful today to focus in on the employability element, because we know that that's a priority for you. I'll just touch briefly on a bit of background for colleagues that weren't part of the committee previously when we talked, just so that everyone's cited on the benchmarking framework and knows what we're focused on. So it provides that overarching view of the whole of local government, looks at cost, performance, satisfaction and outcome where we're able to do so. And because it's that 10-year focus, what it's going to really allow us to do across local government is track and monitor and hopefully understand some of the impact of COVID on local government services and on local communities. So I think going forward over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be really important, an important resource for all of us. But because of that, we are looking at how we evolve the framework. So there's a number of areas that we're looking to strengthen currently around about poverty and inequality, around about the green and economic recovery priorities, and also in relation to mental health and well-being. So there's going to be some changes over the coming years to reflect some of the priorities that we're all looking at. I just wanted to touch on some of the principles of use of the Lgbf, and the reason for that is because as we talk about the data that's available in the framework, we thought it would be helpful to just touch on how can we make use of this data, how can you yourselves make use of this data within your scrutiny role. So there's a couple of principles that we thought would be helpful to highlight before we actually start to talk through the data. So the first is around about flexibility, and I think it's really important for us to highlight that councils are able to use this data flexibly. We absolutely recognise that some data within the framework is of far more importance and relevance to some councils than others. So it's that ability that councils have to draw upon the framework and to use those elements that are of relevance to them and not feel obligated to use all of it and to focus on all of it. So I think that's an important element. It's also that holistic picture of improvement that it provides. I think that's important in terms of we're talking about 10 years of data and we're talking about the whole of local government. So it really helps councils explore the interconnections in key policy areas. So it allows us to move beyond just looking at simple indicators and that kind of league table approach, but actually say, well, what's the data in the round telling us about shifting priorities or areas of growing risk, or how interventions and investment in some areas are having impacts in other areas. So I think that's an important element as well. It's also that how it's embedded within your local planning and improvement processes is key. And I think the work that you're doing here to integrate it within your planning and reporting processes is really critical, because the data in of itself doesn't add value, but it's really about how we find ways to incorporate it in local processes. And I think that's critical because that will make it locally relevant, as opposed to just seeing it as this kind of monolithic stack of data, but it'll actually help you target it. And it's also important to think about how do we reflect what's in the benchmarking framework with other data, how do we supplement it with other data? Because the framework covers all aspects of local government, it's a very high level. And so that goes into the next point, is that it provides those can openers that support the questions. But in order to drill down into the questions, we need to support that with other locally available data and intelligence and expertise. And also we need to use it as that platform for learning from other authorities. So if it's not driving us to go and speak to other authorities to find out what they're doing differently, then it's not realising its full potential. So I think that's going to be one of the key themes that'd be useful to talk a bit through today as we look at employability. And then finally, I wanted to touch on the point about corporate and political leadership and the importance of this with the benchmarking framework. One of the things that comes out time and time again when we look at the variation that we can see across the benchmarking framework is that that's often not, the drivers are not at a service level, but they're often at a political structure and structural and strategic level. And so therefore, in terms of actually understanding and driving improvement, then that corporate and political leadership is really important. So again, that's why we really welcome this chance to engage with yourselves and support thinking about how it can be used. So just before we go into employability, I'll just reflect on, again, some of the high level trends that we can see in the framework. So the first is around about the funding position. which we talked about before. And what we're seeing here in this graphic is that the funding position for local governments is not keeping up with demands. So whether that's because of increasing demands from poverty, whether it's about increasing cost, whether it's about demographic pressures, higher public expectations, what we can see is that gap is potentially widening, and the impacts of COVID, particularly the long-term impacts of COVID, there's a real uncertainty about what's going to happen there. When we discussed this before, there was an interest in whether or not there was any relationship between what we were seeing at a local level in terms of local government expenditure and what we were seeing in terms of Scottish Government funding. So I thought we've done a wee bit of analysis on this, and the key finding that we're able to share with you is that overall, those councils that have seen the biggest reduction in Scottish Government funding have indeed shown the smallest increase in expenditure. There are some anomalies, including the islands, but that tends to be a pattern that is not surprising, I'm sure. So if we look at what's actually happening in terms of local expenditure, what we can see across the country is protection in some service areas, such as children's services and adult social care, that leading to increasing pressure on other services, those unprotected services, whether that's planning, roads, environmental services, culture and leisure, for example. What we've plotted here is a contrast between what's happening in North Lanarkshire and what's happening in Scotland on average. So North Lanarkshire is the orange and Scotland is the blue. So North Lanarkshire, as you can see, is following the trend across Scotland, generally speaking, although there's a couple of areas of divergence. So the first is in relation to central support services, where nationally there's been a big reduction in this, but at North Lanarkshire level, there's actually been an investment in this area across the period. And then a couple of other areas that might be of interest is just about the scale of movements. Although the direction of movements is the same in North Lanarkshire as it is in Scotland, the scale is perhaps different. So we can see that in economic development, we can see it in planning, we can see it in roads, where in North Lanarkshire the budget reduction has been sharper than it has in Scotland on average. But then on the other hand, in terms of investment in services for vulnerable children and looked after children, we can see that there's been greater investment in North Lanarkshire than there has across Scotland on average. So again, broad trends are similar, but there's some areas of divergence that might be interesting to explore further. And as we can see across all of the councils and across all of the data, through this budget pressure, we are starting to see some real evidence that the previous trends of improvement in policy are now slowing, and in many cases they're actually now starting to deteriorate. And that does appear to be a trend that's common across all councils, although again the scale and the pace of that differs, it is a shared trend. So I just want to then move on to this deep dive, if you like, into employment. So as Linda was highlighting, this is an area that we thought would be helpful to look at a little today. We know it's one of your own priorities. We've highlighted there some of the strategies and plans that you've got in place, which are sharpening your focus on this and your investment in this area. So we thought it would be helpful to just talk a little bit about what the benchmarking framework shows in relation to this. So there's currently the measures that we have in the framework are around positive destinations and participation rates, also about employability programmes, and we've also got living wage. And the board is currently considering the inclusion of a measure on youth unemployment, given the importance of this area. And there's other areas that we're specifically looking at just now which might be of interest, and those are around about green and digital jobs in particular, because we think those are going to be areas that all councils will be looking at across the coming period, and perhaps going to be areas that would be useful to reflect within the framework as well. So that's green and digital jobs and skills, I should say. So before I introduce the data, I thought it'd be helpful to just touch on some of the questions that might be helpful within a scrutiny role to interrogate and explore the data. So that's either of yourselves and each other, or questions that you can be posing to your officers, and hopefully that they can help you work through. So the first is about what is the data telling us in the round, and that really gets away from just looking at an indicator on its own, but actually recognising that there are often intended and unintended consequences across the wider system. So there's a real value in trying to look at data in the round. So it's about asking, well, what does the data in employability tell us overall? It's also about really exploring is whether or not our current approach and investment is delivering the levels of performance that we are seeking. And I think that goes back to your own strategic priorities and your own strategic ambition. We certainly think that comparison and relative progress is important, but it's not everything. And so a big driver for the conversation has to be about what your own ambition is and what your own expectations and targets are. And then within that, it's about really exploring about what's driving the trends that you are seeing. So as I've mentioned before, is the Lgbf is at a very high level, and that's its value, but it's also its limitation is we need to ask questions to drill down beneath these high level measures. So it's about understanding what's driving our trends, and are the trends that we're seeing at a high level, are they consistent for all aspects of the measure, for all groups? So for example, if we're looking at protected characteristics, is what we're seeing there equal across all different groups? And also, is what we're seeing true for all areas across North Lanarkshire, or are there really interesting trends and patterns appearing in different areas? Also important to be asking, so what are we currently doing? We know there's a lag on this data. There's always going to be a lag on comparative data just by the very nature of it. So it's always important to explore, well, is this an area where we're already currently focusing our improvement activity? What are we doing? Are we starting to see any evidence of change or traction or improvement? Then it goes on to, are there other councils that are achieving levels of performance or improvement or savings that we would like to see in key areas? So really targeting that, where might there be opportunities to learn? You could also ask, are there other authorities that seem to be achieving similar that seem to be achieving more but spending the same as us, or they're spending less and achieving similar? So again, there's different ways of cutting this and looking at it. And then the critical questions, and these are really about probing and exploring what is it that these other areas are doing to achieve those levels. So what's different in terms of their setup? And this goes back to what I mentioned before, is that some of it might be about the service setup. Some of it may well be about your political priorities, about your structural setup, an organisation, if you like, or it might be about culture, it might be about leadership, it might be much more strategic. So it's things to explore about, whether it's about their service model, their design, is it about their systems, their policies, their practices, is it about the partnerships that they're engaging with, is there something different about the leadership culture that's within their organisation, what about their workforce profile and the staff skill sets, and what about their own strategic agenda and priorities, and then also that local political or demographic context. So I think these give you some of the prompts that you can be using to explore with your officers about, well, if there's other authorities that are showing different levels or levels that we would like to work towards, let's learn a bit more about what they're doing in this space. And then it's about exploring, is there anything from that that we might like to try? So in terms of the drill down here, what we've got is, first, just a bit of context is about the expenditure. Now, this is expenditure broadly in terms of economic development. So within that, I'm assuming that's where your employability expenditure is, but I know it's not the same for all authority areas. So what we saw earlier is that there's actually been a sharper reduction in expenditure in economic development in North Lanarkshire than there has across Scotland. I would just want to kind of explain in terms of this graphic, the revenue expenditure is your orange line, and the black dotted line is the capital, and then the blue line shows your overall expenditure. So if you look across Scotland, expenditure has been increasing in this area in the last 3 or 4 years, apart from a dip last year, and that's really been driven by capital and the investment in capital. In North Lanarkshire, we're seeing quite a different trend. So we're seeing a sharper reduction in investment in this area, and so that's borne out through the reduction in revenue, but also the capital expenditure hasn't shown the same pattern that we've seen in other areas of Scotland. So I think that's important background in terms of when we start looking at some of the employment measures. So I thought we'd start by looking at the participation rate and the positive destinations. And what we've put here in the graph is we've put North Lanarkshire in with other councils that have similar levels of deprivation. So your family group by deprivation. That gives you a sense of you've got a similar kind of a context in terms of some of the challenges that you're operating within and in terms of some of the challenges that your communities face. The red thick line is North Lanarkshire, so that hopefully allows you to see quite easily what the trend is for North Lanarkshire in terms of participation rates and destinations. So the first thing to say is you can see for North Lanarkshire, there's an improving trend in both of these areas, which is certainly positive. What we can see for positive destinations here on the right is the data we've got takes us up to 1920 and actually captures the first year of the COVID impact, and there has been a downturn in positive destinations, certainly Scotland-wide, and that's true for nearly all 32 authority areas. And it's true certainly for North Lanarkshire. If you look underneath the data, what it shows is that that's been a downturn in the number of pupils going into employment. So that's not a surprise, I'm sure, because of the impact of COVID. And during this time, there's also been a widening of the attainment gap between the most and the least deprived in terms of destinations. And that widening of the attainment gap has been driven in terms of the trend going into higher education, because although we're seeing more children going into higher pupils, I should say, young people going into higher education from all SIMD groups, the increase has been far sharper for those in the least deprived areas than it has for the more deprived areas, and that's widened out the attainment gap there. I wanted to draw your attention here, though, to the orange line, which is East Ayrshire, because I thought East Ayrshire quite interesting here, because while a very common trend across all areas has been a downturn in positive destinations, East Ayrshire haven't seen that during the COVID period. So immediately that may be an area of interest in terms of exploring, well, what's going on there? Is there just a lag to that, or did they approach something differently in order to show that result? But again, it will be helpful to drill underneath it. So what's driving that? For what groups is that? Is it about different groups of young people, or is it about different types of destination? And in terms of participation rate, what you can see is a broadly improving story for North Lanarkshire, but a really strong story, particularly for Inverclyde, which is the light blue one. So you can see that they've continued to improve across the area, and the Western Isles also show a positive, strong performance across both of those. A very unique context as an island, but again, I know that there are areas that they were investing in terms of that whole pipeline, as I know all areas are looking at throughout schools and with employers in order to lead to these positive destinations, and a real focus, I think, on social care as well, and how they could bring those two agendas together. If we look at the next area, this is about employability. So what you can see here again is a really strong story for North Lanarkshire in terms of the percentage of unemployed people assisted into work from council funded or operated employability programs. So within your family group, you've got a really strong improving story. A slight downturn in the most recent year's data, but still a positive story. Again, if we were going to draw attention to anybody within that area, it'd probably be Western Isles, who are in the grey line. And that's simply because if we're looking at the last couple of years of data, and if you look at the improvement they're seeing here, there may be an opportunity to explore what's driving that improvement, which groups are driving that improvement, and is there something different about what they've done or the local context. And then I move over to our claimant count as a percentage of the population. So the youth unemployment. Now, as I say, this is a new measure to reflect the increasing challenges in this area and increasing focus on this. And I just wanted to highlight here Inverclyde, and I thought what you could see is quite a common and consistent pattern across all of the areas within your family group. Which has been a real reduction in this up until 2017-18, and then an increase in the last couple of years. And I guess our expectation may well be that across the coming years, this increase is going to continue. But again, I was interested in Inverclyde in the light blue line there, only because while they have also increased in the most recent year, which takes us up to 2021, their increase has been far less sharp. And again, I thought, well, that could be an area to explore further and may well link in with what we were saying earlier in terms of positive destinations and participation rate. So there might be an important link there. As I mentioned earlier, it would be interesting to drill into this, to look at different groups, to look at different areas, to look at different sectors, and to think about what other data can you use to kind of expand this story. And going forward, as well as the green and digital agendas that we would want to look at, I think we would also want to look more at the No One Left Behind and the Young Persons Guarantee agendas and think about how to incorporate that. But again, you'll have data locally in relation to this that you can use to supplement and to bill into this. And then the final area to highlight from the Lgbf at this current stage is about the living wage. And what we can see here, I think, is quite an interesting story. So this is the proportion of people earning less than the living wage. Now, the first thing to say here is if we look at the light blue line, so I should start with North Lanarkshire. So North Lanarkshire are pretty much in the middle of your family group there. So you've shown it's relatively steady rates in relation to this measure, and you're largely in the middle of the family group. But across your family group, if you look at Inverclyde, that light blue line, what they're showing here is a real rapid increase in the proportion of people earning less than the living wage. Now, that's really interesting against some of the other measures that we've just looked at in terms of the participation rate, the destinations, the youth unemployment, and we were seeing real progress in those areas, but we're also seeing a real increase in the living wage. So that again helps us to look at these things in the round, these measures in the round, and think what's the wider picture that's emerging here. If we were looking at this area to identify those areas where there may be opportunities for learning, I think Dundee and Glasgow are certainly showing an interesting story. So they started with levels, they're the yellow line, which is Glasgow, and the darker blue line, which is Dundee, and they both started with rates slightly below Dundee. But if you look at them in 2019-20, they've really managed to reduce the percentage and proportion of people earning less than the living wage. They're definitely on a sharper downward trajectory. So I think there'd be real opportunities to explore what have they been doing that's been driving that. Is there anything that might be relevant or applicable in the North Lanarkshire context? And then also, I think if you look at the green line, which is North Ayrshire, certainly since 2016-17, they've shown a real rapid reduction in this. So again, it would be interesting to explore with them what is it that they're doing locally to drive this. And as with some of the other measures, if you're looking at the proportion of people earning less than the living wage, be interested to break this down further, to look at your protected characteristics, to look at the different sectors within your local economy, and also to look at the different areas across North Lanarkshire and to see, are we seeing different trends emerging in different areas, so that again really to drill down, because although the performance, if you like, in that area has been pretty flat and constant for you, once you start to drill down, you'll see some really important trends which will be helpful across the employability spectrum. Sorry, excuse me. And then just finally, just to finish up really just by drawing your attention again to the work that the councils have been doing in terms of incorporating the Lgbf and sharing practice and learning in terms of how they are using this framework, whether it's with elected members but also within strategic planning. And so there's evidence that's available on our website that gives a bit more detail about how the benchmarking framework has been used locally, and it might give some food for thought as well. So that is the input that I was keen to share today, and just happy to hand that back over now, Chair, to yourself, see if there's any questions or discussion.
Right, Emily, thank you very much. Can we clear the screen?
Yes, I'm going to stop sharing.
Oh, that's good. Okay. No, that's excellent, Emily. Thank you very much. You've made the whole thing quite alive by your presentation, so really appreciate that. It might be helpful to the panel, of course, to get copies, if that was possible. Be useful to see that, you know, just getting time to sit down and study it. Can I ask, are there any questions or comments for Emily at this point? Jim, yes?
Thanks, Chair. Benchmarking is absolutely crucial, and the statistics that you provided show important pictures, but it's almost more important for the information behind those statistics to be analysed and understood. And one in particular that took a note of, the proportion of people earning less than the living wage, and it shows different success rates across the family group. Those statistics might, of course, be impacted by the number of lower paid people who have lost their jobs because of COVID, and that's quite significant in some areas, and it's more prevalent in lower paid jobs and younger people than other areas. So it's that type of subsequent information we need to know whether it's something that your own individual council can improve on, or we are more negative than others because we've lost more lower paid jobs, so the proportion of people with a living wage goes up. You said, Emily, that you do analysis. We've looked at the benchmarking quite closely and asked officers to give us answers on why North Lanarkshire is where it is in any particular position, but you also say that you do a deeper dive analysis on the benchmarking results to find out if you can get information as to why a particular council is doing better or doing worse. Is that correct? And if that's the case, do you feed your results back to the specific councils that of your investigations? That's it.
So we have done some deeper dive analysis as a kind of bespoke piece of work with individual councils. So and that's certainly something that we'd be happy to work with North Lanarkshire on. So if you were identifying an area where you could see your pattern and you wanted to dig into it more deeply and explore learning from other authorities, we could certainly work with you on that, to work with other authorities to bring that learning in. So yes, we have done that with a number of authorities and have shared the learning with those authorities in terms of what other councils are doing in those areas. So it's really about trying to focus the question. So like you say, if the living wage was a particular question where that was of real interest to the council, and then, you know, some deep dive analysis would be helpful, then we would be delighted to support you on that. And if I can just respond in terms of the COVID impact, I think that's a really important point and something to explore. at the moment, it's the data we have in the framework just now that you've seen there won't yet be impacted on it because of the lag, but the data that we're going to be publishing in the next iteration of the framework towards the end of this year, beginning of next year, will absolutely cover the period that's been impacted by COVID, and I think that'll be a really important area to look at.
Okay, thanks. Just to say, Chair, I think all members in this committee at least were interested in the benchmarking statistics that were provided. We've kind of lost our way a bit because of COVID in terms of, I believe, being kept up to date and how North Lanarkshire is responding to it. And if the answer is we're not responding because of COVID, that's perfectly fine. But I look forward to re-emphasising the benchmarking statistics and North Lanarkshire's response to them as soon as possible. I don't know if an officer wants to comment on that.
Do we have somebody who would, maybe Katrina?
Guys, I'm not going to hold you to it. If you say something, if it's the best guess or whatever, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there were some areas that we did divert resources away from, as elected members know, last year, and we had that programme. I think we brought a paper earlier this year on benchmarking, and as Emily says, the information comes out at the beginning of each year. So we started a programme, you'll remember, Councillor Hume, of bringing the information on the previous years, and obviously we did have to lose our way, and then elected members agreed that we would wait for the next iteration to come out, but we then haven't got a new programme. But what we'd agreed a few months back, when Emily last came, is that Emily would then come with this kind of information at particular cycles and do a deep dive to start to get a feel for how you want to build your future programme up. So myself, Linda, Susan, we're happy to work with the panel to get whatever you want out of it back up and running again. But I would probably say, given the timing, that you want to build that up when the next release comes out, and that's probably a really good one to do, given what Emily just said about that will be the one that will see significant impact on from the pandemic, because that's us then as up to date as we possibly can be, and that's where you want to be taking your action based on the information. So hopefully that covers off Councillor Hume, but we're absolutely happy to get that programme back up and running. But I would just recommend we do it on the next iteration.
Thanks, that makes sense, Chair. I do recollect that when we asked for more information on a couple of benchmarking statistics that were provided the last time, we weren't comfortable or didn't think the format of the officer's response for more information was what we were looking for. So you know, we'll need to bear that in mind when the next set of statistics comes out. We'll look at what we thought went well and what we thought didn't go so well the last time, and hopefully when we look at it in future, we'll get the information we think we need. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. I think we're in agreement on that, to pursue along these lines. Leave it in Katrina's capable hands to move it forward. But we'll take that up again, you know, as soon as we can. You know, are there any other questions for Emily at this point in time? Right, thanks, Emily. That was a very good presentation. Really appreciate it. So on agenda item 10, we're asked to note the contents of the report, note the accompanying presentation by the Improvement Service, which establishes the model that will form the performance benchmarking programme of scrutiny moving forward, and note the next steps. Are we in agreement with that? I'll take that as a yes. Thank you. Right, thanks very much, Emily. Appreciate it. We're on to agenda item 11, which is page 153, which is the ALIO's governance and risk management. And Katrina, it's back to you again. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I'm actually just going to hand this one straight over to Jennifer, who will talk you through the work that she's pulled together over the last 6 or so months, if you don't mind.
That's fine. Right. Hello, Jennifer. You carry on.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, Katrina. Good afternoon, members. Members are well aware that in recent years the Council's taken decisions to bring in-house a number of our ALIOs, most notably Culture and Leisure North Lanarkshire on the 1st of April this year, and more recently Campsies Centre Cumbernauld Limited in the summer. And despite the fact that we now have a fewer number of arm's length external organisations, it is still really important that the Council maintains adequate oversight of these externalised service delivery arrangements and ensures that there's no operational, financial or reputational risk to the Council as a result of us delivering services in this way. And over the years, we've developed a suite of interrelated and robust monitoring arrangements, and these are set out at the beginning of section 2 of the report. They include at the outset the formal service level agreement, which clearly sets out the Council's expectations, the services that we expect to be delivered, the levels of delivery, the performance measures, and the financial monitoring that we expect to see in place. There's also the 6-monthly report that goes from the head of service to the relevant service committee on each of our ALIOs, and that covers both operational and financial performance as at year end and as at the current financial reporting period. And that financial performance section is provided by Elaine in her capacity as Section 95 Officer and Head of Financial Solutions. We have regular meetings between the client service and the Chief Officer or the senior management team from the ALIO. We have the appointment of elected members and senior officers to serve on the boards of our ALIOs and management committees, and we also have council officer attendance at the board and management committee meetings. And in addition to that, we have this report to the Audit and Scrutiny Panel at your audit cycle every 6 months. And this is a composite report covering all our ALIOs and our joint venture partners, Amy and Mears. And this report focuses very much on the governance, risk management, financial governance, and business continuity arrangements are in place. And this again is designed to ensure that the Council has any early warning of potential risks. Again, this report includes an update on potential financial risks by the Head of Financial Solutions, but in this case, it's reported by exception. So we only bring forward details on financial matters where there are matters that require significant attention by the board of the individual ALIO, along with attention by our own accountants in Financial Solutions. So I'm pleased to advise members that over the past 6 months, all ALIOs have continued to operate effectively, and board and management committee meetings have all continued to be held remotely. As COVID restrictions are lifted though, from the beginning of August, we are seeing the ALIOs begin to look at how they might resume more normal service delivery. And Mears has taken the decision to bring all staff back into the workplace, both operatives and office-based staff. Other ALIOs are looking at a hybrid model with staff in where they have to be, or with staff in on a rotational basis 2 or 3 days a week. The report also describes the insourcing of Culture and Leisure North Lanarkshire, which I've already mentioned, and Campsies over the summer. And we are now in the final stages of applying for both those companies to be struck off the Register of Companies House. So I would expect the next report to the panel convener to confirm that strike-off has taken place. The report highlights the statutory bodies such as Strathclyde Partnership for Transport, Concessionary Travel Scheme and Lanarkshire Valuation Joint Board. Although the Council provides funding to these bodies and appoints members to serve on their boards, they are governed by separate legislation and statute, and that means that our level of scrutiny can be a little less intensive than with our wholly owned ALIOs. So we have a proportionate response with an annual oversight report going to the relevant service committee. And we're currently in discussion with the services to make sure that the 2020-21 reports for SPT and concessionary travel go to Environment and Transportation Committee, and Lanarkshire Valuation Joint Board goes to Finance and Resources Committee at the most appropriate time. In terms of the financial governance and the update from Elaine's team that I've already mentioned, we are noticing that over the past 6 months, North Lanarkshire Properties is continuing to experience a material reduction in rental income due to COVID. However, there are some signs, some small signs of optimism. The levels of rental repayments are increasing, and also where tenants may have accrued debt during COVID, we're beginning to see some recovery there. And that's as a result of a real concerted effort by North Lanarkshire Properties to make contact with tenants, to engage with tenants, and to look at putting individual repayment plans in place for those tenants. And also in the last quarter, we've seen some encouraging signs of applications and inquiries about properties from new companies and businesses looking to locate into a North Lanarkshire Properties office or industrial unit. Nevertheless, we've got furlough due to end next month, and as such, NLP's Management Committee and our own financial solutions team are paying close attention to North Lanarkshire Properties management accounts. Routes to work is included in the financial section, but it's included because the company has seen an increase this financial year of just under 1.4 million to its revenue income, and that's largely through Scottish Government monies that have been awarded on the back of COVID to address the employability and to look at recovery work and supporting people back into employment. So it's really interesting that we're seeing that growth for 2021 on the back of the figures that Emily's just talked us through. And it'll be interesting, allowing for the lag that she described, to see how that additional investment is helping us a year from now to support people into employment. Because of the additional money, Routes to Work have increased their staffing establishment with a number of temporary posts to the end of March next year, and the board have been made fully aware of the additional budget, the additional staff and responsibilities that they now have. Finally, looking at MERS in terms of financial position, the defined service agreement, which the council put in place at the start of lockdown, restricted MERS works to emergency repairs only. As COVID restrictions were lifted, we got a bit of relaxation as well, with, for example, multi-trades being able to go into a house and more than one operative travelling in a MERS van. So the defined service agreement was able to end fully on the 30th of June this year, but you are aware of the difficulties in the construction industry just now in terms of labour shortages, in terms of increased costs, and in terms of getting supplies through. And as such, Financial Solutions and MERS are keeping a close eye on company trading, with the possibility that we may need to look again at the defined service agreement if those issues do not show any sign of relaxing. Appendix 1 to the report lists the ALIOs that are still within the scope of this panel. Appendix 2 provides you with a summary by each ALIO on how they're standing up services again post-COVID, and also their top 5 risks. And the recommendations, convener, are on page 153. I'm happy to take any questions, and I will hand back to you for the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was very good coverage. Appreciate that. Are there any questions or comments regarding agenda item 11 and what Jennifer's had to say? Are we okay with that? Right. I see it's actually saying approval, but I think it's probably for noting. So we'll just the Audit and Scrutiny Panel is requested to note that governance and risk management arrangements with the council's arm's length service delivery providers remain sufficiently robust, providing assurance to the council that the entities delivering services on its behalf are effectively managed. Note the head of financial solutions assessments in relation to these ALIOs, where the coronavirus pandemic continues to have a material impact on company trading and financial statements, and agree that the relevant boards of management or management committees should continue to monitor financial performance closely, along with ongoing separate oversight by financial solutions. And 3, note the measures and recovery strategies that are being put in place by individual companies to resume service delivery as the COVID-19 restrictions are lifted, alongside managing risks and maintaining business continuity arrangements. And 4, note the top 5 risks identified for each ALIO and included within individual company risk registers, and identify any areas of activity for further detailed reporting and consideration at future meetings of the Audit and Scrutiny Panel. Are we fine with that? Is there anybody wanting to make any other comments? Are we okay? That's good. Well, that's us, folks. Page 154. Thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon. It's been an interesting meeting, and I appreciate that you've all given up your time for it. So we'll see you again in the not too distant future. Thanks for coming. Thank you.